Hi, this is Chris Schlarb, and I'm here with Gustavo Turner.
Hello.
I feel like we should probably just start. We should just jump into it.
Yeah.
The two of us met when you were doing an LA Weekly feature that I think you had pitched to them about the Music for Airports record that I did a couple years back. So we got together at Pan's.
That's right.
In LA, and I just really enjoyed rapping with you, and I remember thinking at that point, it would be nice to talk again.
Yeah.
I felt like there were a lot of things that like we kind of got into just as sort of like side, as asides in that conversation. And obviously, there's only so much stuff that can be covered in like a single page, article or interview. But over the intervening maybe 2 years, I've tried to kind of just keep in sort of like general touch in your orbit. And I feel like I ended up learning a little bit more about you in that time, and that's that not only are you kind of a prolific photographer and writer, but also had done things for cartoon strips and acting, and I think you'd just given some sort of presentation about like Shakespeare.
Yeah. That was September.
Okay.
A couple months ago. It's November now, 2018. And I gave a talk at the Philosophical Research Society in Los Feliz. They had asked me to help them organize their collection of books about Shakespeare and Francis Bacon that they have in there that was gathered by Manly Hall, who founded the PRS. And when I was looking at them and trying to rearrange them, I realized there were all these really interesting stories about this strange group of people between the 1850s and the 1950s who were completely convinced that Francis Bacon had written Shakespeare's plays and came up with a variety of quite intricate ways to prove it.
Yeah.
They weren't interested in investigating that claim. They were interested in finding backing for their argument that they already had decided that Francis Bacon had written Shakespeare.
What we would call confirmation bias now.
Confirmation bias, yeah. So it was really interesting, and they have quite a few rare books in there, so that was great.
Yeah, how did that go? Now I'm fascinated. Now I want to know more.
There might be another one coming up. We've been talking about doing it again, or maybe doing something else with the rest of the rare book collection. It's a very interesting collection. Some of it was lost after Manly Hall died in the early 90s. He died under mysterious circumstances and might have been killed or might have been neglected, and then there was a controversy within that place, and it ended up with part of the collection being stolen or sold. And so there is a lot left, a lot left, but they're missing a few of the most valuable items they've been missing for a while. Yeah.
Speaking of the LA Weekly, I'm curious what your sort of point of view on what's going on with the LA Weekly now is. Are you still writing for them, or?
No. Me and everybody I know stopped all contact with LA Weekly in November of 2017 when the new ownership took over, led by a right-wing political operative from Orange County named Brian Kaye, who, in a very shady way, getting investors that nobody knew who they were, went and bought the LA Weekly off of what used to be New Times or Village Voice Media,
right,
and immediately laid off all the very competent editors that we have been working with, like overnight.
Yeah.
And it became a very strange place and a very strange situation, and Jeff Wise, who was a columnist there for a long time, started a campaign called Boycott LA Weekly, and I'm on their side.
Yeah. And he's starting a new weekly or monthly or some sort of publication?
It's a print publication called The Land, and I'm doing photos for them, and I know all the people who are really spearheading the effort.
Yeah.
Jeff Weiss is one of them, Jen Swan, and Liz Ohanessian, and Sarah Bennett.
A lot of like expatriates.
Yeah, I'm forgetting a couple of people, but sorry guys. And yeah, the idea was to get enough funding to put one tangible physical magazine with very inclusive, high quality standards, just to showcase what can be done in terms of printed media in Los Angeles, and hopefully people will be excited by that and there will be something more lasting. But right now it's just something that, people are doing as a labor of love.
Sure.
One project at a time. They do intend to pay the writers and photographers. They think that that's an important part of the pitch, but
Sure.
the people who are actually running it are doing it in their own time, and the fundraisers and creating the websites and all.
Is it now? I know, like years ago, we were kind of talking about that giant kind of cover story you wrote about the nurse with wound list.
Yeah.
Is it strange for you now to sort of like have this catalog of work that you wrote for the LA Weekly before it was this kind of bizarre zombie publication?
Well, somebody from a group that does nonprofit stuff for journalists, like right after the LA Weekly got bought, he volunteered to use his technical know-how to give us PDFs of all our work. So we have all the work. The LA Weekly seems to have left most of it up. I haven't noticed anything funny. The catalog is still up there, but we have it backed up. And, when people go there, and if I send somebody to look at an article, they still get the traffic.
Sure.
I mean, they did buy that catalog when they bought the thing. My friend April Wolf, who was the film critic, she's in a much worse situation than what you described, because she still writes for the Village Voice. I mean, not anymore, I guess. The Village Voice shut down, but for a while she wrote for a Village Voice. And then LA Weekly had struck some kind of deal, the new LA Weekly, to run her, to sub-license her articles from the Village Voice. So her articles were being still run without her getting paid extra by the people who had fired her in the shadiest possible way.
So it was almost like syndication kind of.
A little bit, yeah. And then they hired this terrible, terrible man that we found out that he wrote fan fiction about non-consensual sex to write our film reviews. Like, it was like we went from like America's one of the best like feminist point of view critics to a rape fan fiction guy, sexual harassment fan fiction guy. Just
it's like the Trump administration. They just found the worst possible people to install at the heads of each department.
They just named a new digital editor, who is a man who runs a paintball course in Orange County where they reproduce Fallujah and other like war places, and they cosplay that they're at war.
Unbelievable.
This is the guy who's running the digital operation right now.
Okay, well, let's stop talking about LA Weekly. I was just curious about that, because that was kind of those are the pretenses under which we met, and I always felt like it was, LA has this kind of amazing history of kind of like independent journalism, going all the way back to like the papers that like Bukowski wrote for, the LA Free Press and all these different things, and to sort of like not have anything except LAist and a few websites that seem to kind of have like regional writing.
Yeah,
it's just kind of this like wasteland, and I'm as somebody who I don't know if that was like just a part-time job or if it was a full-time thing. I mean, the amount of work that you did for them over the years was kind of like substantial. Yeah. So I kind of felt like no one better to ask perhaps than you, kind of how you felt about this, kind of maybe even like what comes next. Like, even I think of like magazines like Arthur and different things that existed over the years. Yeah. Right. Like there's like nothing like that any longer, and I wonder if it's just I mean, I know what it's like to run an independent business. I know it's difficult, but I don't know if this is just the romantic in me, but I also feel like it has to be feasible. It has to be possible. Like, it can't just be that it shouldn't exist. And I don't know if it's a matter of like that poor management, or if, you know what I mean? Some folks just aren't good at certain things, and, you know.
I think that, well, I think if you're both a musician and an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So you have both brains, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing here, but I think that the engineering part of your brain is the similar part that allows you to be a functioning independent business owner.
Yeah, I'm not very good at engineering or business, really.
But we're sitting in the studio right now, and this exists, so you're good enough that it exists.
Right, yeah, for a little while.
I think the problem is that when you have a publication, you have a surplus of people who are writers, who are like musicians.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a profession that self-selects for a certain type of mentality.
Right.
And so you might find a few people who are both writers and the people with enough organizational skills to actually set up a kind of small business that is very niche right now, like that would be. But it's rare, and those people also have to wrangle all the other writers and just figure out, you know, how to name editors. And
right.
When those people at the LA Weekly, they knew what they were doing. They were buying a platform, and they were emptying it of content, and they were trying to get content as cheap as possible, or try to get a certain politically slanted content that they really wanted to get under people's noses, pretending to be the LA Weekly brand. I have no issue whatsoever with an Orange County Republican coming to LA and starting a paper and publishing their ideas. I think that would be great.
Right.
What was underhanded about this was that they took over a brand that meant something else, and in a very secretive way kept denying that they had an agenda or that this is what was happening.
It seemed kind of like a Trojan horse type of situation.
That's what it seemed to us, especially since this guy his only claim to fame was that he ran editorial right-wing editorials in Orange County for most of his career, and always seemed to be failing up and have some kind of backers that nobody knew who they were, who were very interested in him pushing these things. He wasn't a journalist. He was sort of a pseudo-journalist. Did a lot of panels where he would like softball questions to Dinesh D'Souza and people of that ilk.
Right.
And then suddenly he comes to LA and he claims that now the LA Weekly is not going to change, and it's also not going to be political in any way, which, given the history of the paper, is a strange claim.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I want something that I would want to read, and I know a lot of people who want that too, but in order for that to happen, you need investors, you need people who are business-minded, that those investors who trust with their investment. You probably need the business managers of those investors to approve this and not tell them that they're throwing money down the drain.
Sure.
So the money logistics side of the operation is not coming together.
Mm-hmm.
People don't seem to realize that if that doesn't happen, there will be no progressive slanted press in Los Angeles anymore.
You know, I mean, even when I was asking you about it, I don't mean to be like cavalier, like, well, why doesn't somebody just do it? However, I do think, as far as like, you know, my own personality, I ask those questions of myself about, let's say, the studio or the record label, and then instead of complaining about it, I build it as best I can while taking care of a family of 5 and not, you know, running us into complete financial ruin. But I sort of feel like in trying to start like the Big Ego record label, I thought a lot about you know, Fame Studios and Royal and and Sun and Stax and and Motown, even all these places where I thought there was a beautiful period of time in America where you had like all these like regional studios that became labels, and that's how you had all of this music that got pushed out of different geographic locations. And then over and over the years, I almost found that the musical landscape started to kind of mirror the corporate landscape, and it became like sort of like it became harder and harder to say, well, where are these guys from? Oh, they're just from LA. They're just from New York. You know, certain folks just move to certain places, and then you pick up the people who live there, and now they're the new members of your band or something. But maybe for me, the nice thing is that always living in Long Beach, I always felt like I was kind of out off the beaten path anyway. And, you know, when I went to Fame and recorded there with like David Hood and Spooner and these guys, to me, that kind of felt like that was like the pilgrimage to make, because those guys are still doing it. I mean, today, you know, 50, 60 years later, like they played with Aretha, they played with Otis, Arthur Connolly, Staple Singers, you name it. And now, you know, you could still go to Fame, and for a couple $100, you know, they'll play on your song too. There's this like really beautiful thing about that, like you have to come to them, you know. And it's hard for me now to see on the landscape studios or labels that feel like they're representing like a region in the way that, you know, we were talking about like the LA Weekly, it was representing this region. So I don't know, there's not many more things that I think I can
well, I'll tell you something interesting. One of the people, because it's easy to make fun of the current owners because they're also very, very incompetent, and right now they're suing each other.
Yeah.
So, you know, the incompetence is coming out in the lawsuit that we already knew was happening. But the previous owners were not that great either.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who they were based in Denver and Phoenix. And then one of the guys who was actually supervising the editorial operation, he actually literally said, my dream is that if I grab the copy of one of our publications in LA and I get on the plane and then I put it down and then I go to Denver and I pick it up, the tone will be exactly the same. So his dream was to create a USA Today of alt weeklies.
Right, homogenized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was an agenda there, like he outright said this.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people who want that feeling, who want the opposite of what you and I like.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there are enough people who either don't care or that actually like that point of view too. So,
do you think it's possible? This kind of makes me think of a maybe more broad philosophical question, which is that, do you think it's possible in this day and age of sort of like hypersensitivity in a financial and political sense to create something that has controversial opinions and personality and is covering the things that are like off the beaten path? Because I think of, you know, that I think I talked to Andy Herman a while ago, and he said,
Andy was the editor of the Weekly at the time when this all happened.
And he said that he really wanted the Nurse with Wound list article done, but the only way to do it, to be able to like support it and give you the resources necessary, was to make it a cover story. And I remember it coming out at that time, and I was just like, what a great thing, because maybe this leads me into something else, because it makes me think a lot about your personality. It's sort of a distillation, which is that you seem to kind of be obsessed with like sort of like subgenres, like the kind of like there's sort of like everything that's happening on the surface level, and then a few layers below that is where you get interested.
Yeah, I mean, like that is something that I found interesting, but I just, I don't think about it that way in particular. I think that there are stories that are interesting to me, and if I can convince an editor that they will be interested to whatever they want to accomplish in the publication, then I start doing them. Sometimes I do stories that I do because I've become interested in something, and then I go off on a tangent, and like I try to learn a lot about it. But I'm not particularly interested in obscurity for obscurity's sake.
Yeah, no, I didn't think. I hope I didn't come across as like saying that it was only because it's some kind of like subterranean thing. But over and over, I've kind of, the more I talk with you, you seem to know about the things that are kind of like certainly deeper than surface level.
Yeah, I mean, like if I go to a Chinese restaurant, if I go to a dim sum restaurant while I'm eating, I'm just trying to figure out what are the dynamics between all the different people who run the floor, the older ladies who like push the cart, and then there's a guy in a tuxedo, and he seems to talk to the guy in the suit and tie, and I'm eating, having the conversation with the table, and at the same time part of my mind is like, how does this work?
Right.
Like what are the parts of this, and what makes this interesting? So that's a feature of how I look at things. So if I'm going to be looking at a record, like I would listen to Bobby Gentry's Fancy, and I would just be fascinated by the electric piano or the electric organ in it, and at the warmth of that sound and that type of thing. And so I would turn it around and see that it was recorded by Rick Hall at Fame Studios. And then I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Is there anything else that sounds like this?
Right.
So now with the internet, you can go, oh, there's all these other stuff that was recorded. Oh my God, this Aretha Franklin record is using exactly the same piano.
Right.
That's why it sounds exactly the same. So, I guess that's going deeper than just saying, oh, that's a cool song. Like, I'll let Spotify play something else.
Right. Yeah.
I've always been interested in that. On the other hand, I'm not a musician. I've done musical projects, but I'm one of those people who didn't have the opportunity to learn music at a young age. So, I've sang in a group with Robbie Lee, who's a multi-instrumentalist in New York. We had a little band. And I did some experimental music, too, with him. But other than that, I just, there's always a distance between... There is a point in which writing about music to me is the same as writing about the adult industry, which is something that I wrote about, for example, recently, or if I wrote about politics, or if I wrote about, I will come with my own angle to it, and I will dig deeper, but that's just because what I do. Mm-hmm. And then with music, I just realized too that these are interesting things to talk about and to socialize about, but ultimately it doesn't touch the music.
Mm-hmm.
The music is the music, and the music doesn't need me to tell a story. That record doesn't need me to tell a story.
Do you think you need a certain kind of detachment from your subject to do justice to whatever you're writing about? Do you feel like if you get perhaps too friendly or become too close? I know some journalists, it seems less and less worry about like the ethics of journalism, and they, don't mind being friends with the subjects that they're writing about. I'm curious, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think you should be friends with whomever you find. Like, the world is hard enough. If you find people you like, you should be friends with them.
Yeah.
And if you want to write articles about them, then you should bear in mind that, you're going to have a particular take based on knowing things. You also might know things that you don't want to write. I mean, in general, as I get older, I've never been a writer trying to find dirt or bad things on people, so I haven't had that problem. But as I get older too, I am very, very, very careful what I write about people, because those things live forever on the internet. And even if I know something, I wrote an article recently, and the subject got upset. And they got upset because I was objective about them. I had lots of bad things I could have written, and I deliberately didn't, because I said, no, that's not a point. And people are so thin-skinned these days about the press that anything that doesn't sound like a press release, they just think that it's an attack.
Well, and it's funny you mention that, because I actually think I get frustrated when I see the opposite thing happen. When, let's say, a record label puts out my album, we write up the press release or the one sheet, and then the press for the record is just what we wrote. And I just think, this is journalism. It doesn't exist in here at all. You're literally just writing what I said or what the label said. And that's kind of interesting, because, with the whole psychic temple thing, I kind of started experimenting with like the cult leader imagery, and then I just started putting it straight in to the press releases and the one sheets, and 100% of the time it was just they would just reprint exactly what was. They're like, cult leader. When I was
at the LA Weekly 2010 thereabouts, that was the time when Best Coast was getting very big, and Bethany Cosentino had, for some reason, had posted a lot of stuff about her cat. And then in the press release, they started referring to the cat. And then suddenly every article was about her cat. And by the time that I went to interview her, it was very clear that she was sick of talking about the cat, and found it very distracting from what she wanted to talk about, which was the music. But you can play that both ways too, like, I remember when Howard Stern said, if Michael Jackson is going to make people call him the king of pop, I'm going to make people call me the king of all media. And he said that on the radio live as a joke.
Right.
And then suddenly every article is like, Howard Stern called him the king of all media. So, you can manipulate people into thinking that what you feed them is actually journalism. It's not. And there is a difference between PR and journalism.
Well, there's an interesting kind of weakness here, because when journalism is eroded because of lack of training or funds, people don't want to hire real journalists, then you can kind of start to chip away at the fundamentals of like a free press, right? Almost from within. And I kind of started seeing that happening just even with music press, which is far less important than, let's say, talking about politics or what have you. A few years ago, when I was on tour doing the Psychic Temple, doing the Psychic Temple stuff, I kind of was developing this whole act where I would be kind of very antagonistic with the audience. And I almost felt like after Trump won, I almost couldn't do it anymore, because that's what I was doing. I was doing this whole insane, over-the-top. It was a joke, but there, like a lot of good jokes, like there's a lot of truth in it. And then afterward, I just kind of felt like I don't know if I want to do this anymore, because, like, this guy's kind of. It was a kind of trolling of the audience in a way, where I would, I'd say things like, I want to rate the audience because I'm tired of the audience, like, criticizing me. I want to criticize the audience. Then I saw the president doing that to the press directly. And I was like, okay, clearly I didn't have anything to do with this, but I was kind of thinking about some of these things, playing with these ideas. And then the next thing I knew, they were like very real and kind of presented back to me.
But do you think your discomfort was because you hadn't created enough of a theatrical experience where you could have like the license of the stage to do that? Because it was still, maybe you were wishy-washy about, is this Chris or is this the character of the quote-unquote Chris that is mean to the audience?
Yeah, well, my wife asked me that question a few times, and she, you know, I was curious about it too. I think it started off kind of, I was testing the waters a little bit. And the more I did it, I think the better I got at it. And after, I think I was on the road once for, you know, like a month or a month and a half by myself. And I came back and I had to like decompress for like 2 weeks because I had like totally become that kind of like character by myself, driving from state to state, show to show. And I remember I came back and we kind of started getting into it, like, it was just so combative, and we're not like that normally at all. And I was like, whoa, man, I think I have to like...
But did you have a costume or different makeup or something while you were doing that?
I would dress in all white. I had sunglasses on. It was this bizarre, literal, you know, like transformational thing. And in the beginning, I didn't even want to put the clothes on. I had the idea, and I was like, okay, I'll wear all white. This is the whole cult leader shtick. And then I didn't want to do it in the beginning, and the more I did it, the more comfortable I got with it. You know, there are just kind of humorous, almost Spinal Tapian realities about traveling by yourself with like extra sets of like white Levi's and button-up shirts. Like, how do you load in with your normal clothes, and then you go into like the bathroom and there's only like 15 or 20 people at the show anyway, and they all saw you come out. Now you're wearing like a all white getup, you know. At a certain point, I had to start like tuning those jokes out. Like, I had to just be like, well, I have to do this. This is the show, you know. But I think at a certain point, I just kind of stopped enjoying it. It was fun in the sense that I felt like I started to understand what putting on a good show was about. Because I did a lot of experimental music and free jazz and things for a long time. And one of my critiques with that music is that it would become a kind of like ghetto unto itself, you know, where people would do the same things over and over again. The whole point was like, oh, it's free, it's improvisational. I'm like, yeah, but it's totally predictable. I know exactly how the whole set is going to go. I may not know the micro details, but